Well,
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Lindsay Garcia. I'm the executive director of the 22Q Family Foundation, and we are partnering on a series of webinars over the year with CaringTide, this amazing organization that really dives deep into adult planning and trying to get us the best information as far as it comes to resources for our loved ones with 22Q. I also have a son who's 11 with 22Q, so I'm kind of starting to wrap my head around all of this stuff and get organized. And I'm just thankful that we have CaringTide here to support us. I have a couple just announcements for the community, two kind of upcoming things and things that are currently going on. So if you are not aware, we are currently registering for our 4th annual virtual Run 2.2 for 22Q. It's a run, walk, ride, whatever type of movement you'd like to participate in. We have a variety of different distances that you can sign up for. But the cool thing about this is it brings the community together across the whole country. Every year we try to fill the map. So we try to get a representative from our community in every state, and we're close to doing that. So registration is $22 per person. And the week to participate in this is May 31st through June 8th. We currently do have commemorative t-shirts and medals available as well. However, even though registration is still open and will remain open until that week, t-shirts and medals may come a little bit late because it's past the deadline, but you're still welcome to add those onto your registration. It's just a great opportunity to kind of get involved with the community, raise awareness, and really bring your community to surround and support you. So getting your local gym involved, your school, friends and family. You can learn more about this on our website, 22qfamilyfoundation.org, and click on the events tab. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is we also are now accepting applications for our 2025 Riley Dempster 22Q Family Foundation Scholarship. I realize that everything we do is very long-winded and has lots of names, so I apologize. But we award this scholarship annually to students that are attending a 2-year, 4-year trade school or vocational school. And in order to apply, you definitely have to have a student ID. That's a requirement for our application process. You also have to be a U.S. citizen and either have a 22q 11.2 deletion syndrome diagnosis or a duplication. And the cool thing about this scholarship is it's also open to parents and siblings. We know that, this diagnosis affects the whole family. And so we do provide a few scholarships to parents and siblings. We're awarding 10 students this year, each $1,000, and you can apply through June 30th. So to learn more about that, also visit our website, 22qfamilyfoundation.org, and you can click on the education tab. So excited to hear about Social Security and really like how this affects long-term planning for our loved ones. So Jenny, I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lindsay, and the 22Q Family Foundation for allowing us to do this. We taught a class for you several months ago, and we kind of presented it as like a one-stop shop of here's all the information you potentially need to know, for putting together a life care plan. And let's see, sorry, I'm getting a little notification here that I'm speaking Spanish. My Zoom is saying it sounds like you might have switched to speaking a different language. So no, I am not speaking Spanish. So hopefully this is coming through clear. And then if you do need caption, please feel free to turn that on. But when we presented that longer webinar, it is a lot of information. We had several people request to break it down into smaller bite-sized chunks. And so that's what we're doing with this series of webinars that we are hosting with Lindsay, and just providing that as a benefit to this community, because we have kids that have disabilities and we know what this is like to try to navigate putting this all together. So with that, I want to share my screen. And Jesse, are you seeing that okay as far as my slides?
Am.
Okay, perfect. And I want to pull up my chat here so I can see if you have questions. Jessie is also from CaringTide, and she will help to monitor the chat tonight and try to answer your questions as we go. Please put your questions in the chat, and then we will save time at the end too for additional question and answer and maybe some more specific type of situations. I just want to give a few little housekeeping things tonight. I'm going to do my best to try to keep this to an hour. But again, these are complicated topics, and so I do want to give it justice and not rush through too fast. But towards the end, when I give some scenarios and some samples of how Social Security dollar amounts are calculated for you, I will just kind of go through those, and then you can watch it back and pause and see which type of situation is more specific to you. You also have some great resources within the 22Q Family Foundation for Medicaid, but because Social Security and Medicaid are kind of linked a little bit, I just want to touch on that lightly tonight, and then I know Lindsay will supply additional training for you around Medicaid, or we can do that for you too on a later webinar. So I want to also warn you that there's like a couple of slides, just 3 or 4 slides right at the beginning that are a repeat, because I want to introduce this concept of creating a life care plan for families who may have missed other webinars, and so that it will help you link this thought process together of the different steps and stages. So it'll be really quick, but just a warning there. All right, so with that, let's dig in. I just want to give this little disclaimer at the first. CaringTide respects every individual's right to express who they are. In one-on-one discussions, we will use person-first or identity-first language based on the person's preference. In group settings, we will use a mix of the two in hopes of having everyone feel like they are being included and respected. For those of you who are new to CaringTide or to our webinars, I'm Jenny Dopp. I'm the director of CaringTide. I'm also a CHSNC, which is a chartered special needs consultant. And so I've been working in this planning professional planning stages professionally for about 16 years. First as an executive director for a nonprofit for 10 years, and then most recently with our state's parent center developing transition curriculum. And Social Security and Medicaid were a huge part of that. This is a labor of love for me, both professionally and personally. That is my son Jackson there on the right-hand side in a gray sweater vest. And he is 24, almost 25 years old. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, he was the first diagnosed in Utah with a rare chromosome duplication called 7q11.23 duplication. I was given one sheet of paper by the geneticist, and he said, "I'm sorry, that's all the information I have for you." And I was thrilled because it had been 7 or 8 years of really struggling to find out, this was more than developmental delay that we were trying to navigate. And then later he was diagnosed with autism. So I'll talk about him and use a lot of personal experiences throughout the night, but he is my why. And this is why I do what I do, is because we truly were pioneers for our diagnosis. And I know some of you may feel like that as well as you're trying to find the right medications, the right resources and support. So this is Brady Murray, our founder. He has 2 children with Down syndrome and then one with 22q deletion, and then also a child with ADHD. And he has actually 11 children total, but 4 of them have disabilities. And he's also a CHSNC, and he's been a certified financial planner for 22 years. And one day his wife, Andrea, said, "What happens when that school bus stops coming? I need help now. What are we doing?" And he tried to find an organization that could help him with all of the different pieces: estate planning, financial planning, special education, Social Security, and he just really couldn't find anybody that could help him navigate everything. And so that's how CaringTide was created. And so what we do is we help families put together a life care plan for their children, and we coordinate a strategy. So we take all of the different pieces, whether it's estate, financial, family resources, and we help you put together this life care plan. When you're doing this on your own or with us, we want you to incorporate 3 specific strategies, and Social Security is one of those strategies that falls under that financial strategy. But there's also family resources and estate. So as we dial that in, that looks like your personal resources. What are you guys setting aside? Is your child even going to be eligible for things like Social Security and Medicaid? And of course, the legal documents and financial planning, insurance, caregiving, those are all of the different pieces that go into it. And as you watch that logo in the middle of the picture, it's going to change, because this is something, even with Social Security, that we always have to monitor and reevaluate. I want to show you just a quick picture. Again, this is kind of one of the last repeat slides here. But this is a typical family. This is your next door neighbor with neurotypical kids. They have their child, they're just working towards graduation from high school. And then really they just, after the child graduates and launches, they're focused on themselves for retirement and then their passing. Well, my journey started 5 months in utero with my child, of figuring out that there were some brain structure anomalies there. And then, of course, 3 years old, getting on the special education school bus. Junior high was kind of heck on wheels for us with behavior and mental health. And then here we go with the Social Security piece. Depending upon your income level, you may be able to tap into Social Security younger than 18 years old. But for most families, it'll be about the 18 years, the 18 years of age mark when you can apply for Social Security. In some states, you can apply for guardianship at least 17 and a half. And so people want to really get a jump on this Social Security thing, and they want to get started earlier. But unless you qualify on the parent's income lower, younger than age 18, you really can't do anything until that child has their 18th birthday. And so celebrate the birthday, and then the day after their birthday, you can go ahead and get started and apply. There's some other strategic ages that will occur when we're talking about SSI. For Social Security. SSDI is another term that a lot of families are not familiar with, and that's tied to your child working or potentially when you retire or you pass away. And I'm going to go through this all tonight, but I want to just show you this timeline to show you some of these critical ages and stages. So this is the repeat slide here, where we have gone through and talked about all 9 steps in different webinars, and we will continue to do that throughout this year as we introduce more of these deep dive concepts to you. But tonight we want to focus on just step 4, which is the financial resources piece that is tied to the public benefits of SSI and SSDI. So on the left-hand side of this graph, these are your public sources of funding, meaning public benefits that you have to qualify for. So things like Medicaid and Medicare and what they pay for. So this is not extravagant lifestyle that people are tapping into. This is basic things that we need to live, like room and board, paying for the rent and their personal needs. But on the right-hand side, you can see all of the types of things that we still need to find additional funding for, because Social Security is not going to fund that. So with Jackson, that's my son, and as I've talked about him in other webinars, he has this, multiple diagnoses, but one of them is autism. And his superpower with autism is politics. And so he is constantly watching the news. He's constantly on his phone to see what's happening on all of the different channels and what executive orders are coming out. And so if he didn't have a smartphone or a computer, that sounds like a first world problem. But for his quality of life, that's actually pretty key. And that's not something I can pay for if his equipment breaks with Social Security. And so I would need to build in some other resources for that, and that's on that private funding. So things like him working, money that's in the ABLE account, money that we are supplying for him through his third-party trust. We love the beach as our family, so for our family trips, we just love a good cheap vacation to the beach and chill. And so we want to build in that for him in his life, to have that beach vacation or a new Star Wars t-shirt, or whatever it is that he needs. So understand the difference between a public benefit and what it pays for versus the private funding sources. Okay, so let's dig into Social Security. The biggest takeaway that I want you to leave with tonight is, if your child qualifies for Social Security, you need to impress the number $2,000 into your mind. And we do not want your child to have more than $2,000 in their name while they are participating in Social Security and Medicaid. That is a huge threshold for them. And in order to tap into Social Security, you really do need to meet Medicaid's definition of a disability. So that's tied to the age that the disability was acquired and the level that the disability impacts them. So I don't want to get too specific on that tonight. I want because it depends upon your child and where their cognitive scores fall and how their disability impacts their life. If they're younger than 18, it really matters how much you make as a parent, because your income matters as far as the deeming factor, which I'll cover tonight. If they're older than 18, then your income does not matter. And again, we'll go into all of those pieces. But when I talk about eligibility, those are some of the things that they look at. Now you'll notice that the screen changed and I added a little calendar there. And that is because the age matters. We want to make sure that if you have a child who's 19, that you have looked into Social Security to see if they qualify versus if they're 14 and they're dependent upon your income still. The other thing that changes is with the insurance. When you receive Social Security, you'll receive the first letter that you receive is checking for work credits, which I'll show you in just a moment. But most likely it's a denial letter because your child hasn't worked. And so they'll just say, you know what, you don't qualify. And so parents kind of get upset and think, there's no opportunity here. We don't qualify. But what they're doing is they're checking for these work credits to see which program you're going to qualify for. And then your second letter that you receive, which is your acceptance letter, is tied to that Social Security. And when that happens, it's not always the case, but most likely your child will then receive Medicaid benefits, which is for the health care piece. I'll talk about this later, but there's two types of Medicaid. But when I'm speaking about it here, I'm talking about the Medicaid health care. So when we get our Social Security, it's based upon the earned income, unearned income, in-kind income, and deemed income. These are all of the different pieces that Social Security looks at. And so we're going to go through that tonight to make sure you understand those key pieces. So let's start here. What income Social Security does not count? Now you'll see there's a ton of bullets there, and we don't have time tonight to go through those. But this is the way that the Social Security calculations are made. They're looking at employment. They're looking at how much you make. They're looking at how much is in your child's account. Are there any assets in their name? So again, as you go back and watch this, I want you to read through these and then you can reach out if you have questions or if you want a consultation, we can go through this with you. But there's a number of things. And right now, Social Security is a bit challenging because of a lot of the changes. And so I was working with a client the other day and needed to change their bank account information and get her some information. And I waited for 2 hours with Social Security on hold for 2 different days before I was able to get through to them. So just know it's a really challenging time with Social Security, but it is possible to navigate it and we can help you do that. Okay, so how does income affect SSI? So what we have to figure out is your countable income. And again, you're going to get these slides back so you can really look at this closely and do a deep dive on it. But the very first step is they subtract any income that we do not count from your total gross income, and the remaining income is your countable income. And so you can see the calculations there, and it will make sense more as we go through these slides about countable income. And so let's start with this first one. So here's your example. There's Jackson when he graduated from his post-high program. But your Social Security federal benefit with unearned income. So your total monthly income is $300 on this. And remember back to the slide with all of the bullets. They do not count the first $20. So they subtract that out and $280 is your amount. So if you're on the SSI program, the most that you can receive is $967 per month on that program. Now, I think it used to be $947 in 2024, but we had a little bit of an increase, a bump this year in 2025. So it's up to $967. So they take out that first $280 and $687 would be the benefit on that. Here's another example of earned income. So the total monthly income in this example is $317 on the gross wages. They don't count that first $20, which is the $297. They also don't count that on the second bullet was the 65. So that equals 232. And so as you're going through this, you can see how every situation is different. Sometimes when I'm first working with a client on Social Security and they're telling me that the child only gets $667 or something, but they're charging them rent, they're doing all of the things. And so this is how we're able to figure out what you're actually able to qualify for is those bullet points that I showed you on that list and what applies to your specific situation and how they come out to the amount that you're getting on your check. So here's another example. The Social Security benefit, this is with a state supplement. So if you're in California, this would be a good thing that would apply to you. So here's that $300 Social Security benefit. They don't count the first 20. That leaves you with the 280. Again, we always start up at that 967 amount, and then we take out the countable income. And so it would be the 687. But California, they kick in an extra few dollars for all of their people. And I'm not saying that California is 15, but there's certain states that give you a little stipend that adds on to it. So you actually get higher than in some cases 967. Okay, and here's the last example of how they count that income. So this is Social Security federal benefit with the state supplement with somebody who's working on the earned income. So again, you can see the gross wages there. They don't count the first 20, and then they're working, so they don't count the first 65. And so they figure out what the countable income is, and then they add in the state supplement because they're living alone and they're working. So it matters, your amount will change based upon if you're working, if you're not working, if you're living on your own, if you have roommates, if you're living at home with your parents, and they're not charging you rent. I'm saying you, but if you as parents are not charging your child rent and they're getting Social Security, that's going to ding their Social Security and they won't get as much. So we need to make sure we charge them rent. I'll show you how to do that. But just my point was showing you all these really confusing examples because it's new information to you. But when you go back to that bulleted list, you'll see how all of those bullets fit into these different examples of calculations. Okay, so Social Security under age 18. So if a person who is not married and it's determined by Social Security that they're head of household, they're under age 18 or is under age 22, or is a student attending school, that's how they calculate some of the eligibility requirements. And here we go with more eligibility as far as what does it mean to be a disabled child or a child with a disability. So if you're under age 18, we may consider you disabled if you have a medically determinable physical or mental impairment, including emotional or learning. And so this is where they're really looking at the cognitive scores. When, I had a client in North Carolina and they applied for Social Security and then they got the call from Social Security, great, we have your application, we need you to come in for this neuropsych evaluation. So even though you're supplying a lot of information during the application process, they really do their homework to determine the level of disability and how it's impacting your child. And so there's some thresholds there that they have to go over to make sure that your child qualifies. So deeming, this is a term to determine income levels and when you're eligible based on the income. So when a person who is eligible for Social Security benefits lives with a spouse who is not eligible for Social Security benefits, we may count some of the spouse's income in determining the SSI benefit. So that's for an adult situation. But when there's a child who is blind or has a qualifying disability and is under age 18 and lives with the parents, or a parent and a step parent, and at least one parent does not receive SSI, we may count some of the parent's income in figuring that child's SSI payment. So that's what I talked about at the first, about if your child is younger than 18 years of age, your income matters. And so in a lot of situations, your child won't qualify if you make too much until they're 18. And then when a non-citizen has a sponsor with certain exceptions, we count some or all of the sponsor's income in figuring the SSI benefit. But once you reach that magical age of 18, then it's a little bit easier for some of our children to qualify. So if you're older, then they do not look at the adults, at the parents' income, but you still have to meet those requirements. So we're still looking at cognitive scores to see, how they're impacted by the disability. Are they working? Do they earn too much money once they turn 18? And how long is this disability expected to last? Is it something that started, when they were younger? And it really just depends upon each situation. I've had some clients where, somebody with the same diagnosis received SSI, but the other person didn't. Just know if you get that denial, the second denial letter for the SSI, you can appeal it. And so we need to show, and it's always about the data, right? That we have the data to support meeting the eligibility requirements for that. So just know that you can appeal that decision. Now let's talk about some resource limits. There's, again, two different programs, SSI or SSDI. On the SSI program, think back, the $2,000 limit is key. Always remember that with the individual or a child. If it's a couple, then it goes up a little bit to $3,000. But we really need to make sure that there's not any assets, bank accounts, property, anything like that in the child's name that would put them over that $2,000 threshold. Okay, so let's talk about SSDI. So Jackson started working at our local amusement park when he was in high school and would just work on the weekends. And then as he got a little bit older, he started working for McDonald's, and he works about 4 or 5 days a week at McDonald's. And so when we apply for Social Security, he won't even be looked at for SSI. He'll go right to that first program, SSDI. And that's because of his age, and he's also paid into FICA so many dollars, and he's earned what's called a work credit. So he has those years of service that show he's been paying into the system. And so he would go right on SSDI. The other way that you can tap into SSDI is, let's say your child is on SSI and they've never worked. They've always just received that 967 with SSI. Well, once you as a parent retire, that will change your child from SSI over to SSDI, which will be great because it's actually a little bit more money on the SSDI program, and they can also work, and you also don't have that same $2,000 threshold. But you still have to meet Medicaid's definition of a disability. The other thing that you should know about SSDI, and this is pretty important, is when you're on SSI, you're generally going to be able to tap into the Medicaid healthcare program to cover medical needs. However, once you go on SSDI, after 24 months of being on SSDI, then you switch over to the Medicare program. And sometimes this is a surprise for families because they just get notified of this and they weren't expecting it. And it can be a pretty big deal for you because Medicare might have different providers. So you might have to change doctors and learn how to navigate that system on coverage levels and things. So just know that SSI and Medicaid generally go together, and SSDI and Medicare go together. Hopefully I said that right. Okay, let's talk about those work credits and how you earn those. So it's earned by working and paying into the Social Security taxes. So Jackson's working at McDonald's, he's having FICA taken out, and you can earn up to 4 credits per year. The amount needed for a work credit changes from year to year. So for example, in 2025, you can earn 1 credit for each $1,800 in wages or self-employment. So 7240 would equal 4 work credits. Okay, and again, you guys, I know this is new. These are new concepts, new terms. So if you have questions, put those in the chat. There's one question that came up. Does SSI require different cognitive tests at different intervals? The doctor that did my son's neuropsych eval said IQ generally doesn't change. So if he has it now, it's not likely to change forever. We are going to talk about that you have to qualify for Social Security, and they do reevaluate that over time. When they're younger, there might be some more variations with the cognitive score. It really just depends upon the individual and the diagnosis. So I hate to give specific answers to that. We'll just keep it really general. But it's also based upon Social Security's determination. So they might not just take your doctor's neuropsych evaluation. They might want to do their own, depending upon what they're looking at on your eligibility scores on that. But as my child got older, I did see that the cognitive level kind of stayed about the same. With the 22q diagnosis, though, you guys have a spectrum of range there. And so each person is impacted a little bit differently. And so again, it's based upon the individual and working with Social Security on that. So let's talk about a little bit more detail on how that SSI is going to change to SSDI on retirement. And this is really important for you to know, because as we're putting together a life care plan for your child, remember that will of like the family resources, the estate planning, and then the financial services. We need to factor this in because you're trying to figure out how much you need to retire and get to the end of your life, whether or not you need long-term health care or assisted living. Then we have your child, and we're layering together Social Security benefits, Medicaid health care, Medicaid waivers, any assets that you leave for your child, and then what's left that you need to fund within your special needs trust. So the SSI and SSDI piece is pretty big because that's one of those layers that we're building on. And if you're at 967 on SSI, and as a parent, you're projected to receive, $4,400 from Social Security, your child, once you retire, will receive half of that amount. So that would be $2,200. And then once you pass away, they'll get 75% of that amount. So as you're layering this together and doing some calculations, that's what we specialize in, is helping you do those calculations. But if you're trying to do that on your own, remember that you'll have these amounts to help bolster that. So on the SSDI, remember with SSI, you had that $2,000 limit. With SSDI, they do not have a resource limit on the assets, like that savings, property, investment threshold. However, just notice that third bullet there, it does have limits related to work. So with Jackson working at McDonald's, I think he would get $1,200 on SSDI in addition to his McDonald's income, but he can't go over that threshold. SGA, substantial gainful activity. SGA, that's a key thing to know. So Jackson could not earn more than that $1,600 a month in 2025 in order to keep his SSDI. Also, unearned income, things like gifts, inheritance, or investments does not affect SSDI eligibility. And then again, what I just talked about, that the child will receive half of my husband's retirement amount, and they'll go off my husband's amount because my husband's paid into FICA more. Okay, retirement. So a child can receive up to 75% of the deceased parent's Social Security benefit. And depending upon when you pass away, that would trigger that for the child. So again, even though maybe they weren't eligible for SSI if they were younger than 18, if you passed away, then they would be eligible for that SSDI benefit. And so they do have to follow that same medical eligibility, disability diagnosis eligibility. And if you pass away, they don't, I need to change that from retirement to deceased, but Jesse, make a note, we need to change that. But if you're deceased, they don't have to have the work credits in order to get that SSDI. So after the parent passes away, this benefit's typically available until that your child turns 18 or 19 if they're still in high school. In Utah, it's 21, 22 years old. And then again, 75% of that amount. So it's a pretty big piece that we need to layer into your plan. Now, another vocabulary term that I need you to learn about with Social Security is something called a representative payee account. So basically, a representative payee account is a specialized bank account that I can set up at my bank, and it's dedicated to be a receptacle or a vehicle to receive the Social Security deposit that will come each month. And it's important that we title that account appropriately. So for example, Jackson Dopp, he would be on the account by Jenny Dopp, who's his representative payee. And the only thing coming into this account is that Social Security. It's vital that you keep records of the money coming in and out of the Social Security account. Decide what type of a log you want to use, and how you're going to keep receipts and notes about what the money's being used for, in case Social Security comes back and looks at that account. And we want to make sure that we keep it clean, meaning we want to keep money separate. Only the money coming in from Social Security should go into that account, and the money going out should be for the purposes that are valid Social Security purposes, financial purposes. So here's some pro tips and also some pitfalls. So a lot of families don't monitor that very closely, and it's possible that they exceed that $2,000 limit, whether it's a birthday money that's coming into the account, into their asset account. Maybe they have a separate checking account that grandma's putting money in, maybe some child support that came that's going to throw off your whole plan, or interest that you're earning on the account. So make sure you really monitor that account to keep all of the assets in that child's name under the 2,000. Be sure that you report within 10 days any changes. So parent-child income changes, maybe there's some new jobs. Let's say Jackson got promoted at McDonald's, and that's going to change our allocations. Somebody moving in and out of the house, and I'll show you this in just a minute. But like in my situation right now, we have in our home me and my husband and Jackson, and then a daughter who just moved home from college. So we have 4 people in our house. So if she leaves, or if we add another person to the home, that's going to change the calculations and the dynamic. So make sure that you keep these things up to date. Also, if Jackson got married, that would drastically change our situation for as far as his Social Security, especially if Jackson married somebody that was not receiving Social Security. That would be big. So make sure you do not mix your personal funds and any money in that representative payee account. And then also watching the earned income. Make sure you know those thresholds. If it's on SSI, $2,000 the threshold. If you're on SSDI, that 1,600, 1,640, I think it was, is the threshold there if they're working. Now, if they are working, there's some great tools you can utilize to kind of shelter away the money. 2 options right here is the student earned income exclusion, and we could do a whole class on employment. So I'll save that for another class, but also the PASS plan that is associated with Social Security. The other thing that sometimes people foul up on is that they just ignore, or they just don't have the bandwidth to deal with Social Security emails or mail or phone calls. Make sure you're responsive. This is something that you want to make sure that you're monitoring. And then failing a disability review. This was asked earlier, if you have to reapply or you have to keep validating your child's diagnosis. Yes, it's possible. And so make sure you're keeping really solid medical records. You have, your IEPs to back it up, the neuropsych evaluations from the school, maybe letters from specialists or doctors, whatever you need, so that if you get a notification for Social Security, you're not scrambling for documentation. And then again, if your child is on Social Security and they're younger than 18, a lot of parents think, oh, it's just going to continue once they're 18. But that's not always the case. So be prepared that you might have to go through what's called a redetermination process in order to get that Social Security to continue after they're 18. Sometimes they really want to review that eligibility again. So here's another term. It's the DAC, the disability, let's see, what is it? Disabled adult child. And so with the DAC, this is when you are a parent, you have a child with a disability, they meet the eligibility requirements, you're retiring, and so then that would also trigger that SSDI. But your DAC or your Medicare could change. So your SSDI or your Medicare could change if Jackson got married, especially if Jackson married somebody who was not also a DAC individual or an adult with a disability. There are a few exceptions to that. We won't get into all of those tonight, but just know that if your child is considering marriage and they are getting Social Security, it's not a reason to not get married, but just know that the plan you've been on and this finance trajectory that you've been on could change once that marriage occurs. So what is the biggest expense? And this is by far housing. And again, this might be a repeat slide for some people, but it's really important in this Social Security conversation. So 967, if they're on SSI, that's the most that you're going to get per month. Well, in Salt Lake, the average one-bedroom apartment is $1,400. And that's because I would want Jackson to live in downtown Salt Lake so he could access our metro line here that runs north and south. We don't have great service east and west across the Salt Lake Valley. So that's a pretty price tag for him, a pretty high price tag. And obviously, if his rent's 1,400, he's not going to be able to pay for all of that with Social Security. So we've got to figure out as a family other supports, whether it's him working or other contributions to help with that rent. And then that brings up this topic of in-kind support and maintenance. So in-kind support and maintenance is food, shelter, or both that somebody else provides to you. In-kind support and maintenance is counted as income for Social Security. For example, if someone helps pay for your rent, mortgage, and I believe food, they've kind of redefined that. I think on September 30th of 2024, they redefined the food situation a little bit more and eased those restrictions. But they're still looking at how people are supporting you. And so again, as we go back and do the calculation on charging Jackson rent, if I tell Social Security that I am paying for everything and Jackson's living here rent free, they're going to give him less money with Social Security because mom's got it, mom's taking care of it. So that's why we also want to make sure that Jackson's paying for his part. You know, if Jackson were a typical neurotypical child, then you know, he would be launched and kind of living on his own. And so that's why I don't need to feel bad about charging him rent, is because I need to put my own oxygen mask on first as a parent. I need to be able to use my resources, my income, to get me to the end of my life, but also use it to help prepare for Jackson for the end of his life. And Social Security is one of those benefits that's still intact for him. And so I need to tap into that to help not only like protect my income so I can use it for the things we need to for our family and for Jackson, but also what if something happens to me and Jackson goes to live with his older sister? That is really going to put a strain on his older sister to care for Jackson and her own family if Jackson didn't have Social Security. And so these are steps that we need to take to solidify our life care plan for our loved one. It's not something where you know, we just don't want to tap into it because it's not worth the hassle. It's also part of that emergency planning that we already have this step done for Jackson's care. So as they're looking at in-kind support and maintenance, if you live alone and pay for your own food and shelter, it's not counted against you. If you're living only with your spouse and minor children and nobody outside of the household pays for your food and shelter, or you live with other people and pay your share of the food and shelter expenses. And again, you're going to get these slides, so you can go back and read these. So how does my living arrangement affect my SSI benefit? Okay, so we're going to go through some fun examples of how this is calculated. And again, these are very general, so I want you to just go back and watch this so you can figure out which situation might apply to you. And Social Security is going to walk you through it as well when you apply for Social Security so that it can be accurate. But it's important that you communicate that you're charging your child rent so that you don't have to go and file the form later to change it because you didn't tell them in the first place that you're charging them rent. Okay, so here's the first example. If Jackson lives alone in an apartment, the Social Security benefit rate is $967. 1/3 of the Social Security benefit rate would be that $322. So they take the $322 with the $20 that they don't count, and you can see through as you go down how much they'll give you for that benefit in that situation. Here's option 2. You live alone in a home that you own. So here's that $967 that you start with. We always start with the $967. They exclude that first $20 and the $100 for the in-kind support and maintenance. And then through the calculations, then your benefit would be $887. Okay, here's example 3, excuse me. If you live in another person's household and you share the expenses, okay? So you're living with your sibling and 2 other adults in a home that your sibling is buying and your only income is Social Security. There's 4 people in the household. The mortgage payment is $700. The average monthly bills are $200 for electricity, $100 for water and sewer, and $600 for food. The total monthly expenses are $1,600. Because there are 4 people in the household, your share of the expenses is $400 per month. And then those 2 bullets there will show you the difference. If you pay your full share of $400 for the household expenses, there would be no reduction of your benefits and you would get the full $967. So this is the scenario that I find a lot of parents in, is that they're not charging their children rent. And so when I talk to them, they're only getting about $600 per month. And so that's why we have to charge that rent. Once the money's in the Social Security representative payee account, then you would take out the $400 and pay yourself as the parent for the rent and record it as rent. And then you can use that money for what you need to use it for. If you're tucking it aside, and it's your choice what you want to do with that money. And then that second bullet, if you pay less than $400, then you would be receiving that in-kind support and maintenance that they count against you. We would apply that 1/3 reduction rule, and the $967 would be reduced by the $322. And again, this is a couple of slides ago about how they figure out that in-kind support. So your payment would only be the $644. But once I talk to you and we do your consultation and we figure out what the situation is, then we know how to correct it. You just have to file a form that shows that you're paying rent, that the child's paying rent, and then the next check, once they process that, will go up to the $967. So we got to tap into all these different pieces and figure out how the system works the best for your family. And then here's an example D. If you live in a house rent-free, again, mom's taking care of everything. They're going to do those exclusions for the first 20, and then, if they're working, and then they go and figure it out, and you can see down there at the bottom, $352 would be the benefit amount on that. So it's really important that we understand this in-kind support and maintenance. We understand how that they don't, count that first $65 that you earn, that they do the general exclusion of the 20. And that's, because you talk to people and you're like, well, gosh, why is Sally getting, $800 and why am I only getting $400? So this is the reason why, is there's all of these calculations going into it. Okay, so as we think about that rent situation in Salt Lake City of $1,400, his Social Security is only going to be $967. As you're putting the financial plan together for your loved one, make sure you're accounting for all of the different revenue streams that you can tap into. So public benefits down there at the bottom, that's the Social Security and the Medicaid. Your private assets is what you're contributing as a parent and a caregiver to supplement. And then also on the public benefits would be the Medicaid waivers. So there's the Medicaid health care that they'll tap into, but also some Medicaid HCBS waivers, which I'll talk about in just a second, very briefly. And then also the insurance, whether it's Medicaid healthcare insurance or your private insurance and Medicaid as a secondary. And then natural supports. Are there people that can help support Jackson, whether it's neighbors picking him up for work so that he doesn't have to use money for transportation? What are the natural supports that you have within your family and your support network, your community, your religious organization? What else is there in Jackson's life that can support him? One thing that I do want to do, and I could teach a whole class just on ABLE accounts, so this is just really brief, but an ABLE account, a lot of people, it's kind of a dirty word sometimes in their mouth. They're like, don't get an ABLE, there's a Medicaid payback. But really, there's a place and a purpose for an ABLE account. It really depends upon the situation. It depends if there's tax benefits. It depends on your asset levels. It depends on if Jackson's working or not. But an ABLE account is really a specialized savings account for our kids with disabilities. And there's a purpose for it. It helps you stay under that $2,000 asset limit. So I'll give you a couple of quick scenarios, and these will be covered in some of the bullets. So again, you can go back and watch this. But let's say Jackson is on SSI and he has $2,400 in his representative payee account to Social Security bank account. If he's over that 2,400, that's going to impact his Social Security checks. So I would need to slide over, $500 over to an ABLE account really easily. And that shelters the money away from the purview of Social Security and Medicaid. And it keeps Jackson under that limit of the $2,000. The other great thing about it is that you can use it for any purpose, and as long as it's not illicit. I think there's like 3 or 5 things that you can't use ABLE money for, but you can use it for education, those Star Wars t-shirts, Slurpees, haircuts, his smartphone. It's really an account that's meant for purposes. It's called a QDE, Qualified Disability Expense. And let me go back just one slide. You'll notice down at the bottom, it's talking about an UTMA and an UGMA and 529s. Sometimes an ABLE account might be a good spot to roll over money that could be counted as an asset for families. So I could talk with you more one-on-one about your specific situation, and if you have a 529 that you've got to shift, or an UTMA or an UGMA, or maybe you want to pull money out of a 529, I can work with you to help you understand that there's not penalties on the money that you put in, but only penalties on the interest that you earned. You can also have a beneficiary on an ABLE account. So if your child passed away, if they do pass away, you can pay for their funeral expenses and settle their estate. And then depending upon your state and the program, the ABLE program that you've joined, there could possibly be a Medicaid payback. There's about 48 different ABLE programs. A lot of them have different benefits. Some of them are FDIC insured, some of them aren't. Some of them give you tax benefits, some of them don't. Some of them have really low fees, others have high fees. There's investment strategies. So what we do as with our clients is we compare and contrast the different programs for them and help them understand how to use an ABLE account for this purpose of sheltering the money away. In Jackson's situation, you can put up to $19,000 per year. In 2025, it changed up to $19,000 per year. And then that third bullet, if he's working in 2025, that actually changed up to $15,000 and I think it's $60 that he can put in addition to the $19,000. So Jesse, make a note and we can update this slide too. But even some states are limiting the payback amount on there. Utah hardly takes anything back once they pass away. And that's kind of going to be the trend as people work with their legislatures to change that rule about the Medicaid payback. The other thing you should know is that $100,000 threshold. Once you reach $100,000 in the ABLE, then the Social Security would be paused. And so until you spend it down. So be aware of that. Some people don't qualify for Social Security. Some of the people on this call, your kids, their cognitive levels are high enough that they won't qualify for Social Security. But an ABLE still could be a really neat tool for them, because you'll see on that second to last bullet, there's a wide range of maximums. And if your child really isn't going to have a Roth or a 401k, this is a great savings tool for them that is investable money for them. Here's the last slide. You can look at this later, but the restrictions around that, some considerations. We also can leverage this with the special needs trust. You don't want to put all of your child's inheritance into the special needs trust. Into the ABLE account. You really do want to keep the majority of the inheritance and assets for your child in the third-party special needs trust. But an ABLE account is easy money in, easy money out. A lot of times there's like a stable card, a little debit card that's attached to the account. So if Jackson had a disability provider, like an employee, a waiver employee, come and work for him and take him somewhere, they could use this ABLE account and go pay for the movie ticket, rather than having to go through the trustee to get money out of the trust. And, sometimes you can set up a trust with the debit card as well, but an ABLE account is it's really slick for money going in and out. Really quick, there's just this crash course in Medicaid. Again, Lindsay has resources for you on this, but think of Medicaid as a house. And there's lots of ways to tap into Medicaid. Medicaid is not Medicare. Again, remember with SSI, it's Medicaid, but then when you go to SSDI, it's Medicare. And there's 2 distinct programs within Medicaid. And let's even back it up a little bit further. So the federal government gives a pool of money to the states of Medicaid funding, and then states can choose to match it, or it's just a block grant. Like in Tennessee, it's just a block of money that's use it until it's gone. But once the state has the money from the federal government and there's the state match, if that's possible for your state to come into it, then the state gets to decide how they filter that down. It could be for, new births or unhoused individuals or dental programs. But two of those different pools of the little sub pools of money is Medicaid healthcare, and then the next one is a Medicaid HCBS, Home and Community-Based Services waivers. So that might be a new term for you. Every state gets to run their own waiver program. In California, it's done through regional centers. There's 21 different regional centers, and there's different programs like SDP or the Regional Center Waiver Program. In Utah, it's run through an organization called DSPD, the Division of Services for People with Disabilities. In North Carolina, it's the Innovations Waiver, is one of the waivers for people with IDD, intellectual developmental disabilities. A lot of states have extensive wait lists, or they don't have a wait list and you can get in for services, but then you have to wait for funding for services. So really there is a wait list. Every state gets to name their own waivers. This is just a sample of some of the waivers available in Utah, and each of them have different eligibility requirements. You can see there's a tech dependent waiver for individuals who are trached. Most states have an IDD waiver that's part of this HCBS waiver. So intellectual developmental disabilities. So you do have to qualify for it. But once you are building your life care plan, again, SSI, Medicaid healthcare, Medicaid waivers, your assets, your special needs trust, these are all different pieces that we've got to leverage together. And you also have to remember to do it with your estate planning. We'll teach a whole class just on the estate planning piece. In case you missed it last time, we'll recycle it and we'll come around again to try to catch those we missed. But these are just examples of different choices that you can make. And also one of those choices is who's going to be the representative payee on the count. Can Jackson do it himself, or does he need support? Is there money coming in from, a malpractice settlement? Does that need to go into a first party trust? A third party trust is where Ryan and I are leaving our assets for Jackson. Is a pooled trust a better option for you if you don't have a lot of people that can help you be the trustee on the trust? So you'll see the bottom bullet there. It's a combination. It requires planning. But the conservatorship in California, or a guardianship if you're in a different state, is the cognitive level high enough where a power of attorney might be more appropriate? All of these are conversations that we need to have as we build this life care plan, because it all impacts the Social Security and what kind of support your child needs. Okay, so paying rent with a special needs trust, that's why I showed you that trust slide, is because we always want to make sure we pay our rent with Social Security, not the special needs trust. You can supplement if you needed to, and you could show that, but we always want to pay our rent with Social Security first. That's what it's there for. It's there for the basic living expenses. And then you'll see down there with the bullets, other expenses that should not be paid for with a special needs trust. We want to make sure we use that Social Security first. Okay, so 2 out of 3 American adults do not have a will. Our families are different and our children depend upon us. So just the last 2 things, because this could impact your Social Security. But here is a sample letter. Dear family and friends, we've recently completed our comprehensive life care planning for Jackson. Although we certainly don't expect anything to be left for Jackson from your estate, we must tell you why it's so very important to understand why he has a trust established should you ever seek to do so. Or you could mention the ABLE account if you have that, because anybody can contribute to the ABLE. Jackson, grandma, sister, anyone. Jackson stands to lose funding that could total millions of dollars of resources and services to occur over his lifetime. Because if, grandma just out of the kindness of her heart drops $10,000 into his account, that's a countable asset. That's going to put him over that $2,000 threshold for Social Security. And that's why it's so key that we monitor that and that we communicate it. We're not being presumptuous to say that we expect grandma to leave money, but we just need to make sure everyone's educated about it. And then here's the big thing, annual reviews. We've updated our trust a couple of times and other people have updated their trust. I think Brady's updated his 3 times. It's the same with Social Security. We always need to be reevaluating and making sure we understand how things change. The only constant to the only constant is change, and we need to monitor that. Here's a few examples. As we've seen it the past month or two, the market fluctuating. It's doing great right now, but the past couple of weeks it's been a little sketchy. Tax laws change all the time. Your government benefits change. What if your state drops that Medicaid match, which would drastically impact the Medicaid that's coming with the Social Security, the Medicaid cuts that they're talking about right now. They're saying that it won't impact those with disabilities, but we have to plan around that and also do our part to advocate for our kids with disabilities so that people understand what this Medicaid HCBS waiver is, what Medicaid healthcare means to families like ours. Because a lot of people don't understand what Medicaid is, and they don't understand how drastically different those in services, how their lives would be impacted. Again, communicating family changes, relationships change. Maybe in your letter of intent, you've named your sister as the next representative payee who's going to do that, and then she passes away. We've always got to make sure we're reviewing and changing. I like to end with these two quotes. The hardcore truth is that we all have an expiration date on our mortality. We have three choices on how to handle that reality. We can deny it, we can ignore it, or we can plan for it. And then my favorite quote from the water giver, parenthood is about raising and celebrating the child you have, not the child you thought you'd have. It's about understanding your child is exactly the person they are supposed to be. And if you're lucky, they might be the teacher who turns you into the person you're supposed to be. So if you are interested in working with CaringTide for a consultation, we do have a partner family program where we are working with families all across the country to help them figure out what their next right step is. Maybe you've knocked out a lot of the things we've talked about tonight, and maybe there's just a few gaps that you need to close in your life care plan. So if you're interested in a complimentary consultation, you can scan that QR code. You can go to caringtide.com/meet and pick a time on our calendars, and we will meet with you. So I'll leave that up there, but I know there's a couple of questions in here. So let me scroll back and see if we can catch where they are here.
So the first one, Jenny, is if only one parent is retired, but the other potentially younger parent is still working, when will the disabled adult child collect SSDI?
You're going to love this answer. It depends. It depends, because we need to look to see how much they're earning, their age, if they're a caregiver to their loved one. And so it really just depends. We would need to look at that more specifically. And SSA.gov is a great resource for you because it's really laid out well. There's some little buttons you can click on there to say check for eligibility. Is it for yourself? Is it for your child? How old are they? It also depends upon your child and the level of their disability. Just because you have, 22Q doesn't mean they will qualify. So it really just depends upon your unique situation.
The next question, Jenny, is what if you have multiple children? Does it automatically go to the child with the disability?
If you are retired and your child with a disability is on SSI, then Social Security, when you start drawing your retirement, then it should be triggered because you're linked together with Social Security numbers. And so it would be for the child with a disability. All of your neurotypical children are not getting half of that amount. It's just your child. It's the DAC, the disabled adult child. And there's great resource tools on SSA.gov that will explain that as well. So you can look at your unique situation. So I hope that's what you meant and that answered your question. If not, you can clarify that for us.
Our next question is if the child is in college and lives at home, can they still access SSI?
Again, it depends on the eligibility, if they qualify for it, and if they're in college and they live at home and they qualify based upon their diagnosis and their eligibility requirements, yes. Then the SSI, you would have to charge them rent for that.
Going hand in hand with that, regarding charging your child rent, don't the parents have to then claim it as income?
I would have to double check on that, but I don't think so. And if anybody else has experienced that, that's a good question. I haven't had that one before. but I can research that for you, Pam, and get back to you on that. I'll write your name down and shoot you the answer.
And then the last question that's currently listed, the parent is currently on SSDI. How will it affect the child when they turn 18?
If if the child qualifies now and you're on SSDI, disabled adult child, once they turn 18, yes, then they could qualify based on those eligibility requirements. So it should help you to get that in place once the child turns 18 if they haven't qualified already.
That is currently all of the questions that are listed out. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or even unmute yourself. And Jenny will help answer those questions.
I'll do my best, you guys. It is complicated. It is one of these situations where there's so many factors. It's hard to give you like clear-cut answers, but that ssa.gov link is really a good one. So you can go in there and get the basics and also get started. Because what I would do if you haven't been on it before and you want to try to get qualified and they're over 18, because you know if they're younger than 18 and you don't qualify because you're above the poverty level, then you would have to wait till they're 18, but you can call them, get an appointment. They'll call you back on the day of the appointment. But the thing is, you have to sit there and wait for 2.5 hours to get the appointment. And then they'll call you back a different day to actually do the application. But it's great because you can do the application with them over the phone and then send them they'll send you a packet and you send them the information they need. And then you wait and wait and wait. But the day that you apply is when the clock starts ticking. And so you'll get back pay if you qualify, and then you have so many months, I think it's either 6 or 9 months to spend down the back pay on the money that's coming while you were waiting to get approved. So, I mean, it really is a good tool. I know that there's a lot of feelings out there as far as if you should tap into the benefit when you're like, oh, I've got it. I'm the mom. We can cover it ourselves. But again, could you reallocate those resources where you're covering it yourself and put that towards your own retirement and your own needs and securing your own future, and then tap into the benefits that are available to them today? Because again, if you were taken tomorrow and you're no longer here to support them, you know, Big Sister has now got to go through all of this hassle of trying to get on Social Security because Big Sister doesn't have enough money to fund him like you did. So it's really a great tool that we can tap into while we have it with Social Security and Medicaid. You know, there is some management there as far as being the representative payee and you know, having to manage that and track the records. But the benefits are huge because, you know, Jackson would want to live on his own one day. And if I can leverage and get him on a Section 8 housing list, and then wait 2 or 3 years for that, and then we've got our Social Security and he's got his McDonald's money, I mean, that's enough that he could potentially live on his own or maybe have a roommate. So, you know, we want to look with an eye towards our child. There's this really great diagram, and it's Jackson in this circle in the middle. I gotta turn my fingers. Jackson is in the circle right here at the middle. And then there's all these offshoots of lines. And, you know, up here's church, and up here's school, and and down here's employment, and here's extended family. And there's so many different pieces to Jackson's life. And Social Security can be one of those pieces that helps to make everything work. So it is worth it if you're able to qualify. And again, remember the appeal. If you feel like they should qualify, you know, then you can appeal it. So, okay, I know that was a long answer, but just wanted to wrap up with that. One more question came in. If
There's
you're on
a
it.
few more that
Oh,
came
a few
in.
more. Okay, go ahead, Jesse.
Would it really be charging rent if they're paying a portion of expenses if it is divided?
It's just the terms we use for Social Security there because, you know, otherwise you're the parents, you're the homeowners, you're paying all of the bills. But if it's all divided, that's just the way that Social Security counts it, is just paying for the residence piece. And, you know, on Social Security, we didn't get into it tonight, but there are some assets people can have. You can have one vehicle and one home, one property, because you need a place to live. So there are things that are not counted as far as assets, but for the most part, just keep that $2,000 in your mind.
The next question is, where do they go to see if their daughter qualifies?
SSA.gov. There's a great little tool on there that will say, am I eligible for that?
And I linked that right above your question as well, for you to be able to access. And then if you are on SSI, marry someone also on disability benefits, will it be penalized? And how about if spouse is not on disability?
So if you marry somebody and they are on DAC as well, disabled adult child, then that's great. Then it probably won't impact them. Again, I say probably because there's so many factors that go into it. But if they are not on a disabled adult child benefit as far as Social Security, then Social Security is going to look at the spouse's income, and it could potentially knock them off Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare, depending upon which program they're on. So it's a huge decision, and it's something that family members really need to pay attention to so that you're not surprised and you're losing thousands of dollars in support.
If they have an older sibling away at college, but they live here during the summers, do they count as someone in the household?
Great question. I don't know if Social Security is going to be that ticky-tacky on it. You just don't want to be surprised. And so, that might be something that you would want to report within the 10 days that they're there. And as you go through Social Security and you get more experience with it, you'll learn to see what they count and what they don't count. But I think it's always best to be transparent, in case the child at home that from college reported that somehow and Social Security was able to determine that the child at home was living there. It just really depends.
My
Okay.
understanding with that is if it is the primary residency, then that counts as somebody within the household.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where they lived there before and then they're just back, like my daughter.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is all of the questions that we have, Jenny.
Okay, is it as clear as mud, you guys? It's a lot of information, a lot of calculations, but hopefully, and I know sometimes I tell this to my clients, sometimes you have to hear things 9 times because it's just so foreign and it's not something you're used to navigating every day. So just know that it's new, it's confusing, but we'll help you get through it. And once you get it dialed in, it's a little easier, especially once you know what your situation is, what you qualify for, and how you navigate it with your child, it gets easier. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for staying with us tonight. There's more webinars coming up. So watch for those flyers in the communication with Lindsay. She had to jump off. So with that, we thank you so much. And again, if you want a consultation to figure out what your next right step is, go ahead and use that link or QR code. We'd be happy to talk to you. All right. Thanks, everybody. Stop sharing here. And then